First off, you have the writs of assistance, which is a crackdown on smuggling. You've got the liberal search and seizure laws at this point, which is, of course, colonists thought this was a violation of their English Bill of Rights, the English common law, basically, that they thought they were entitled to, and that's problematic. The first tax is the fairly sweet one, Sugar Act. 1764, remember the exact dates aren't important, but you should have sort of like a general time frame here. This tension, Proclamation of 1763, Sugar Act 1764, obviously this will culminate. You have fighting beginning in 1775, so it's about a 10-year stretch there of build-up, so you kind of have at least a general date range there. The big deal here, it taxes certain goods. We have a couple of significances here. Number one, what type of tax is it? External. They're going to collect the tax before these items hit the colonial shore, and the taxes are going to be passed along in the way of price increases to the colonists. Mostly it's going to impact the merchants. They're the ones that are the most angered by this. The other big thing is it makes shipping more complex, more paperwork, confusing paperwork, and violations can be prosecuted. And where does that prosecution take place?
Nova Scotia.
The Vice Admiralty Courts of Nova Scotia, which is not a jury, as it's supposed to be a jury of your peers. It is a judge. The judge is given incentive to find for the prosecution. They are paid more for they're given 5% of confiscated cargo there, and it's sort of an incentive to convict there, obviously. So that's going to be, and there is a vigorous enforcement of this. Did not affect all colonies. It's basically going to impact the colonies that have big cities in it, most notably Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania. The Stamp Act then comes along next, because the debt is still rising here. And remember, this is a tax that is on British citizens since 1695, and it is a tax on all paper goods, basically. It is big changes here. It's an internal tax. It is at the point of purchase. It's almost like a sales tax in essence. So everybody's going to feel it, and it impacts everybody. Everybody needs some sort of paper in their lives, whether it's for a will, whether it's for other legal documents, newspapers, anything here. By the way, the other big thing here is what other types of taxes are these? They are not regulatory taxes. These are revenue taxes. Sorry, that's true of the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act both. Some objected, and what do the British defend themselves with? Great little concepts. Got it? Virtual representation, where all members of Parliament represent all British subjects. That concept, which is not that outlandish of a concept, we have similar aspects or degrees of this in the United States even today, but obviously the colonies sort of objected to this. And then of course this Stamp Act will be resisted. Basically two prongs of resistance here. Remember the difference between upper class and lower class here. The upper class gets together much like we are here today and writes snooty little letters that get shipped over to Britain and take like 4 months to get there. Then they fire a few more snooty letters and things like that. And you know, Stamp Act Congress and that sort of a thing, which they do too. And then the mob, basically when they get annoyed by these things, they go off and they hang people in effigy and they break stuff, and they, usually involving a lot of alcohol, they break into homes and they burn things and they break stuff, some more stuff, and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of the, and both are true. You got the Loyal Nine inciting people in Boston, and you've got all sorts of things going on here with that. And of course, eventually the British are going to capitulate on this one, and they're going to pass they're going to repeal the Stamp Act. They're going to say because for different reasons than the colonists wanted, but the colonists got what they wanted. Then of course they passed the Declaratory Act, which basically Parliament was saying, fine, if we couldn't legislate in all cases whatsoever before, we have that right now. All cases whatsoever, Parliament can legislate for the colonies, which of course the colonies don't particularly agree with. By the way, we forgot about Albany Plan of Union before which was the first attempted organization amongst the colonies. Remember, that was pre-French and Indian War, and it was a loyal organization there. Also ongoing at this point in time, the Quartering Act has sort of sparked some issues here, particularly in New York, where most of the troops are. Legislatures had to pay for inexpensive barrack supplies. Remember, this is not housing. I don't know where this came from, but still most people believe this to be true. Really, they just had to pay for the soldiers certain supplies. New York went in an uproar over the whole thing. They refused to grant the supplies, which led to the New York Suspending Act, which basically knocked down a peg the whole New York's colonial legislature. The next tax is the Townsend duties, tax on tea, paint, lead, paper, etc. And again, a revenue raise. So they tried to go back to the external tax. Colonists were onto them by this point, and this leads to huge reaction here. You've got non-importation agreements by the merchants. You have non-consumption agreements. The non-importation agreements were less effective, only about 40%. Basically, we got non-consumption is a boycott of British goods, which is pretty widespread. Remember, the great symbolic aspect of that is the whole spinning bee thing, where women are getting together and doing the homespun clothes and that sort of thing instead of importing British homespun clothing. The elite are even pressured into it, probably against their will, because if they were wearing the fine British threads, they would get practically assaulted on the streets at times. This is causing, obviously, an increase in tension here. You've got the American Board of Customs Commissioners, another crackdown on smuggling. This adds informers to the mix, where they're going to get a certain portion of the profits, a third of the value of the goods smuggled in a conviction, which of course gives a lot of incentive to just lie. Remember, this is where even technical violations are prosecuted and of course sent to vice admiralty courts. John Hancock's ship, the Liberty, is seized, and that's when the mob throws the inspectors out of Boston, which forces the British to send troops to Boston to sort of to ease tensions there, of course, which really doesn't do that. The Townsend duties are repealed on everything except for tea. And there's still, this non-importation sort of collapsed at that point. There still is some voluntary non-consumption, but a lot of people are still up in arms there. Of course, you got Boston Massacre. We know the events of that one. The committees, the colonies are also starting to coordinate the committees of correspondence, and they are passing things around up and down the coastline there, and trying to figure out what other people are doing and all that kind of stuff. Frontier tension, sometimes they do ask about the regulator movement. There's also some areas of the colonies which are annoyed about their representation in the colonial legislature, most notably the western areas, and North Carolina, South Carolina are sort of some big areas that are annoyed there with that. Tea Act is revitalized in 1773. It actually knocked down the price of tea. It's more of a regulatory act, actually. They're trying to prop up the East India Tea Company, not buying it. You have the Boston Tea Parties and all of the events with that. Again, the mob in action here. The British respond with the Coercive Acts, also nicknamed the Intolerable Acts. Boston Port closed. Massachusetts government revoked. The colonial legislature is Administration of Justice Act. Any person charged with murder while enforcing royal authority would stand trial in Britain, which everybody was up in arms about. There's a new Quartering Act, which still only the government can use empty private buildings to house troops. And you have the Quebec Act also, which established Roman Catholicism as the official religion of Quebec, which people were freaked out about, and also strengthened the power of the royal governors in Canada. This leads to the First Continental Congress. Again, strongly worded letter. And then, of course, you have Lexington and Concord. Remember, Lexington and Concord happens almost over a full year before the Declaration is signed. And This leads to fighting. Green Mountain Boys, Ethan Allen. You've got Bunker Hill all in this time. You've got the Green Mountain Boys overrun Fort Ticonderoga and bring the cannons to Boston to start the siege of Boston. The Second Continental Congress in Philly, they passed the Olive Branch Petition, a loyal message with 3 demands: ceasefire, repeal of the coercive guarantee of American rights, and then all of this fails ultimately, and you've got the Declaration of Independence.
Okay. And so now we start on September or August 31st. Now we start.
American Revolution. Remember, you got the whole little war web there. I recommend you take a look through that. But ultimately, you have obviously the British have pretty much all the advantages here. Best Navy in the world, strong army. You've got, they can even start hiring other soldiers and such. And they do have a pretty dominant early going here. They dominate Boston for a while. They then dominate New York City. They almost kill the Continental Army as they take New York City. But George Washington and the Army escape. You got a couple of highlight events like, you know, the crossing of the Delaware and all that. The war moves south. They try to overrun. You know, they take Charleston and then try to beat up the army down there. Long story short, the turning point, of course, is Saratoga in 1778. First open field battle. Remember, the Americans are good at guerrilla warfare tactics, but they are very poorly trained. They've got no discipline. Remember, this is the thing where they march up towards one another. The Americans fire a shot, the British, a few of them are killed. They fire a few shots back, and then the Americans run away. That's pretty much the staple of battle for the American Revolution. But then the French come in after Saratoga. They instill some discipline. They have experienced people who are training the American troops there, and the Americans get a little bit better in the open field, culminating in what's it called, Yorktown in 1781, where Cornwallis is forced to surrender. George Washington, obviously a big cog in this wheel here. He is the leader. He keeps the army together. He is a very important aspect of all this. He is the Continental Army, basically, and the reason why any of the people stay in it is basically because of him. Peace of Paris, 1783. The big thing we get is recognition of American independence. All royal troops would be evacuated from U.S. soil. That doesn't happen. U.S. gets all land east of the Mississippi River, and fishing banks rights off the Grand Banks. East and West Florida back to Spain with ambiguous boundaries. There's Canadian-American boundary issues with the British. And there's also some agreements done compensating loyalists, pay back pre-war debt, which the U.S. promised to do, and the British are supposed to return slaves. Neither of which happens. Native Americans completely left out. Now they're really in trouble because if you thought the colonists were locusts, wait till you get to the American time period there.